Good morning, everyone. We're about to start. Slight delay, but still within time. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Niklas Schörnig, and I'm a senior researcher with the Peace Research Institute in Frankfurt. And I'm moderating this very interesting panel, I think, on AI and the military use of AI. And we are not only the three of us, but we have one other panelist online joining us later on. And so it's not a panel, to be sure. But going back to the topic, anyone who is only vaguely following the news can't escape at the moment the relevance military AI has gotten over the last couple of years. Starting with recent reports from the Ukraine, where we learned that AI is used to identify camouflaged objects, to the gospel used by the Israeli military to identify targets in Gaza, and we have the US replicator program coming up with several thousands of autonomous systems swarming in the skies of the Indo-Pacific within the next 18 to 24 months. The military use of AI is rather broad and not just limited to the examples I just gave. They range from logistics to training to battle management and obviously to the decision to use force in war. But on the other hand, we also see that AI can be used for good. AI can be used to foster disarmament and non-proliferation. Examples here would be that AI can help inspectors analyze X-ray photos of shipping containers to identify prohibited goods, or it can actually help to differentiate between real earthquakes and seismic occurrences, seismic shocks due to a nuclear test. So we can see this Janus phase of AI being a totally game changer in warfare on the one hand, but it can be used for good as well. Given this background, we gave our panelists some guiding questions, including, so what are the implications of these developments for warfare on a smaller scale, but also for global security and stability? How is AI actually changing the way war is waged? If AI is coming at us with lightning speed, what are the requirements for responsible and ethical use? How can existing and new international agreements or rules be developed to ensure an effective governance of AI? And finally, the look at the positive side, where can we make use of AI, more use of AI, to help us when it comes to non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control? While I cannot promise you that all of your questions will be answered in the course of this panel, I can assure you that the organizers put together one of the best panels on this issue with many good experts on the issue. On my right, we have Tim Swains. He's Director of Research at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies and Senior Research Fellow at the Netherlands War Studies Research Center. On my left, we have Aaron Scholl. He flew over from Canada yesterday, and he's Managing Director and General Counsel in the Center for International Governance and Innovation in Waterloo, Canada. Online, we will be joined by Jasmine Afina. She's researcher at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, and she's also finishing her PhD at the University of Essex, where she looks at how international humanitarian law can inform and shape the development of AI for military targeting. So we have agreed that Tim kicks the discussion off by giving us an insight into how AI actually changes warfare on the ground and the implications of these developments. After that, Aaron will pick up and adds his thought on cyber, the impact of AI on international power and forms of regulation, while finally Jasmine will introduce us to the concept of responsible AI and how the regulation and design and development of certain forms of AI can hedge against the most severe problems with AI. So, having laid out the plan, no further ado from my side. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And technical support, can I get my PowerPoint on the screen, please? So, thank you very much to the organization for the invitation. Yes.
Here we go.
Yes, excellent. I was asked to do a scene setter. And so today I want to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on the wages of war, so to speak. And while doing it so, I always find it very useful to take a step back and think about what war is and how it is affected by the emergence of new technologies. Now, I think it's safe to say that war is and always has been a reflection of the social, economic, political, and technological environment. And through the ages, that has changed, through the millennia, through the centuries, pertaining to the objectives of war, the actors in war, and the instruments of war. And while we're transitioning, and that's a very rugged transition, of course, to a post-industrial society, what would that mean for the ways in which our societies wage war? Now, and for the tools and the instruments that we'll use. They have become deadlier and more advanced, again over the centuries, from stones and crossbows to gunpowder, to cannons, to the combustion engine and the telegraph, onto the emergence of new domains. Think of air, think of cyber, think of space. And then, of course, the emergence of artificial intelligence. Now, military specialists talk about military revolutions, and they see this as the 7th military revolution, if you like, with planners in the Pentagon conjuring up images of robotic swarms using big data analytics and replacing humans on the battlefield. This is not without reason. If you look at the implications of emerging technologies on the conduct of war, experts agree that this will have outsized effects. And experts agree that it is specifically, and I'm aware that you can't read it, this is why I magnified it, that it's specifically artificial intelligence and big data that will have not a high but a revolutionary impact on the character of war in the 2 decades to come. It has become much easier for laymen to imagine what that would look like due to the sheer fact that a year ago we saw the advent of ChatGPT, and many people are using it. We see artificial intelligent applications being integrated in all sorts of everyday applications. And we also see that it is slowly on making its entry on the battlefield, if you like. From advanced targeting to deepfakes outside of the battlefields, to drones and loitering munitions, onto the swarms that I just alluded to. In fact, and thank you, Niklas, for bringing it up, this is no longer something a pie in the sky for 2035 and on. The US very recently, launched a new initiative, the Replicator Initiative, with the aim to field attritable autonomous systems at a scale of multiple thousands in multiple domains. But mind you, the time scale is within a time period of 18 to 24 months. And if we look at the ways in which it will affect war, I will propose that there is 3 pathways. First and foremost, it will change the character of war as we know it. And many of us then think of lethal and autonomous weapon systems for a good reason, but military practitioners and professionals always use the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And military organizations are interested in integrating military AI applications across the entire OODA loop to make quicker, faster, perhaps better They call it smarter decisions. And as such, AI is an enabler on the one hand and a force multiplier on the other hand that is suffusing the entire OODA loop. So it will affect the wages of war across the entire chain. Again, this is not a pie in the sky. This is actively being experimented with. It's leading to new warfighting concepts, from the emergence of multi-domain operations, which now has gone mainstream within NATO, to notions of visions of mosaic warfare in which swarms of autonomous systems work together, to it being actually implemented in the field, if you think of the Israelis' Ghost unit, for instance. We also see that AI is changing the dynamics of hybrid conflict. It can be used to create sophisticated disinformation campaigns based on the experience that strategic actors have gathered over the past decade or so. But now, also using large language models, these can become much more sophisticated than they have been. And that's the present. If you think of the future, then the advent of 5G and the maturation of 5G, the advent, perhaps not of virtual reality, but of augmented reality, and the fact that increasingly our lives are taking place in a virtual realm, will also open up new avenues for societal warfare, if you like. And so the picture of hybrid conflict and hybrid threats that we've had over the past decade may well change from the physical to the virtual domain, which we currently only exploring in the context of science fiction movies. If we would put the two together, the physical and the virtual, I want to show you a little clip of no longer a startup but a scale-up I visited last year, which works on holographic technologies. And so we always think of digital avatars, right? You have an avatar online. But what if we would change that? You would have satellites and drones as sensors over battlefields, and you would have all these men that grew up playing Fortnite would now have a physical avatar in the field that would be attributable, right? Because losing a robot is yeah, you can lose a robot, and they would be playing. They would be playing a game, but they would be waging war, but in the contours of a holographic environment. This is all still in the future, but you see that the technology is here. 3. The impact of artificial intelligence on strategic stability. And I then think we're getting closer to home in the context of this conference. And it's useful to distinguish in strategic stability between deterrent stability, do we have a secure second strike, and crisis stability, is there a use it or lose it dynamic because the opponent can quickly take out our second strike capability. Now, we've looked at this in the context of a larger research project we've done for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, shifting sands of strategic stability, thinking about new ways towards controlling especially emerging and disruptive technologies. And here in the bottom, you see how artificial intelligence does have an effect on both deterrent stability and on crisis stability.
Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me here today.
I think that's it then, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go over there.
From Finland. And by definition, I don't speak too much, but rather in a concise manner. So I hope I will remain in 5 minutes. Now, the title...
Probably a mistake made by AI, I guess.
Maria, you gave me was a view of the EU on the 5th review conference. But of course...
maybe I should just talk over him.
As such, does not have a position on it. So so I will speak from my personal perspective, but I think that that the thoughts that I will be presenting are pretty much shared by the EU member states. So first I would like to have a look at what happened before the review conference, because a lot happened. What happened in the EU? On the EU side, there was a very thorough preparatory process for the review conference. Already February this year, more than 3 months before, the EU member state agreed a very detailed view on things to be discussed. This view, basic positions and objectives on a whole array of items on the RevCom agenda, were registered in an EU Council conclusions. This is a public document for all to see. So my point here is that I think it was from the EU side quite a transparent process of what the EU's positions and objectives were. And what happened before the review conference itself? Well, the review conference itself also was prepared through a very thorough and intense process.
Okay, and now I'm going to speak up because the mic is
by the ambassador of Estonia and permanent representative to the OPCW, Ambassador Lauri Kuusing. He made an effort to involve also those stage parties that are actually based in Brussels and elsewhere. And this is a very important group because it's more than 60. And so this is also a big difference with what happened 5 years ago. There was an online possibility.
greater accuracy. Invasion of Martians, and that led to a lot of societal havoc. Now, imagine there would be a deep fake of Kim Jong-un announcing a nuclear strike on Seoul, of Vladimir Putin on Brussels. It probably would not lead to immediate reaction of the military, but it will create a lot of societal turmoil. Now, I'm very much aware of the notion that we may very well be living at the peak of inflated expectations. The CEO of OpenAI was fired before he was reinstated, and reportedly he was fired because there was disagreement. They were on the verge of a major breakthrough that would lead to artificial general intelligence. So to me, it sort of signals that we're really living at a peak of inflated expectations. But turning that on its head, it also means that while we tend to overestimate the impact of new tech in the short run, we tend to underestimate it in the longer run. And so if you think of that, and we would be living at a peak of inflated expectations, what would that mean, let's say 7, 8, 9 years from now, when it reaches a plateau of productivity? And in that context, I thought it would be useful to take a short look by means of setting the scene to the use of military AI in contemporary conflict theaters. And I'm not going to dwell. I am going to just to sort of give us a better sense of what it is and how it's used. As always, it's a gradual process, right? We speak of military revolutions. Planners speak of revolutions. Typically, these are evolutions, which do not take years but decades to mature. But we see there's a gradual process with AI applications being integrated into the force structures. Its current role is in enhancing existing military applications and not yet in creating Terminator militaries. But we do see that there is a focus on improved battlefield performance with greater situational awareness due to the enhanced intelligence systems. We see improved tactical effectiveness due to enhanced targeting practices, maneuver and speed. And we see higher decision-making speed, in military terms shortening the kill chain, due to the faster processing of big data. And here, the centaur analogy is informative. You see an integration of man and machines. We essentially took a look at three contemporary theaters. So the war between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia and Ukraine, and the ongoing conflict in Israel and Gaza. And we looked at various applications, and we note that as of yet, in the present, there is use of AI-based intelligence, there is use of AI-enabled UAVs and loitering munitions, there is use of semi-autonomous land and naval systems, and, although this is harder to detect from the outside, but based on reports, the use of AI systems in cyber and electromagnetic SEMA activities. How am I doing on time, Chairman? I think okay. So I'm not going to give you all the details. I'm just going to sort of run quickly through it. We have the Palantir technologies with their Meta constellation, which aggregates data to create a digital model of the battlefield. We see the use of Clearview to identify soldiers in the field. We see the use of Copiva software to enter target coordinates into a tablet and to calculate automatically what the direction of firing, the distance to target is. We see in the context, our chairman already mentioned it, the use of the Gospel AI target platform. And according to the former Israeli chief of defense, it allows them to target 50 targets a day, identify 50 targets a day rather than 50 in an entire year in terms of speeding up the target selection process. We've seen the use of loitering munitions. A couple of years ago, there was a dystopia, bam, it went mainstream. Like literally. We've seen Azerbaijan making successful use. I'm aware of my 2 minutes, Chairman. And we're now also seeing it making its appearance in other battlefields. Yes. I think one other example that is relevant is the use of advanced UAVs that can navigate autonomously to map underground tunnels and map underground structures, as is currently being done in Israel. Now, what does that mean? In lieu of conclusions, I only had 15 minutes. It means that the impact of military AI applications is already materializing at present. It means that there is an impact on the conduct of war, on hybrid threat factors, and on strategic stability. And yes, I didn't dwell. That generates an assortment of ethical and legal, but also strategic challenges that we will be discussing today and going forward, in which we do need to notice that major military powers confronted by the promises of a new military revolution around the corner, they're not going to want to tie their hands up front. And precisely because AI is such an all-purpose technology, it is hard to control. Compared to fire or compared to the combustion engine, it's really hard to control. So that means that we need to consider control efforts, arms control and counter-proliferation efforts along the entire production, proliferation, deployment, and employment chain. And I look forward to discussing this further with you and the other panelists during our remainder of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, for setting the stage with a rather bleak scenario, so to say. But I think, Aaron, now it's up to you. So what did he miss? What else is coming at us?
Would it be helpful if I stood up too, or at the back? I'm happy to do it. So first off, let me thank you. Let me thank the organizers for the invitation to be here. It is truly a pleasure and an honor, and I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. I mean, I genuinely mean it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. I've come all the way from Canada, and I thought, given the fact that the organizers wanted me to be here and spent the time and care to bring me over, I want to be of as much service as I can. So I attended some of the sessions yesterday, and I'm going to pivot my remarks a little bit, so just bear with me. But let me start with 3 observations. The first is that fully lethal autonomous weapon systems have already been used. And we tend to talk about it like it's in the future. Let me disabuse your mind of that. Right? That is a fallacy, and I think it's part of the problem. Most people tend to think about it as Terminators, like those killer robots walking around. That is not true. In 2020, in Libya, a fully lethal autonomous weapon system, a Turkish-built Kargu 2 system, was used on a find and forget and fire mission. There's a UN report to prove it. Okay, so observation number 1, we are not talking about something in the future, we're talking about something that already exists. Okay? Observation number 2, the gap between what people think is going on and what is actually going on is huge. I went to something called the REAIM Summit, which is this, and I use the word summit very loosely here. I went to this conference, and the gap between what the politicians were talking about and what's actually happening in the real world, the delta between those two things is the largest I've ever seen. So the politicians were using words like trustworthy, accountable, whatever, buzzword, but then you would ask a question and there was literally nothing there. They have no idea what they're talking about. And then contrast that with what the military is doing and what real experts are doing, and they're running away with it. The companies are building this technology. The militaries are architecting frameworks literally right now, and they're deploying systems. But the people that are supposed to be, at least in democratic polity, sitting atop this structure do not know what they're talking about. And so that's a challenge. Observation number 3 is the speed at which this is all happening. My colleague mentioned it, 18 months. Like, I'm an international lawyer, and no one has ever accused international lawyers of moving too quickly on anything, right? And so that is going to be a fundamental challenge to this community. So I start with those 3 observations to try and situate my comments more broadly, but let me then also say what I think the challenges are. This technology, when we're talking about fully lethal autonomous weapon systems, it will break our laws. And I don't mean like it will actually contravene our laws. I mean it will break our laws in the sense that it does not fit within our contemporary legal governance architecture. Let me explain. I've done an international criminal case before. It is all premised on intention. So let's do a thought experiment, shall we? Suppose that there's 2 people, and they get into a heated argument. And suppose further that the first person is really upset, and they drive to their home, and they get a knife, and then they drive back to this other individual's home, and they stab them, and they kill them. Well, that is clearly a first-degree murder, right? There's premeditated intention. There's a desire to kill, and there's follow-through. That is first-degree murder. Okay. Now, suppose further that those 2 individuals are fighting, and they get into a heated argument, and in the throes of passion, that first individual grabs that knife and stabs the other person and kills them. Well, there's no premeditation. It is a second-degree murder. Okay. Now, let's suppose further in this thought experiment, they're doing drugs together, and they start juggling the knives. And case in point, don't try that at home. But suppose they're juggling the knives, and the first individual throws the knife to the second individual, and they miss, and well, that's manslaughter. There was no intention to kill, but during an otherwise illegal act, someone died. The only thing that's changed in that circumstance is the person's mind. There's still a body in the morgue with a knife sticking out of its chest in all 3 of those circumstances. The only thing that's changed is the intention, that person's mind. Now let's contrast that with autonomous systems, where does one draw intention from? Where in that chain do you impute intent? If something goes wrong, is it the programmer? Is it the commander in the field? Is it the person who made the decision to switch from a commanded system to an autonomous system? Where do you draw intention from? So when I say it will break our laws, that's what I mean. I mean that there's going to be a fundamental challenge to the way that we think about law. The second challenge that I see is dual use. I don't think it would surprise anyone if I said that the best kit is in the private sector right now. Right? Militaries are not generating this technology. The private sector is. And the commercial use imperative is profound. Do not discount the pull from the private sector on this. Everyone is rushing to AI. We're all hooking everything we possibly can up to the internet. And the commercial imperative here is profound. And what that means is we are going to see a diffusion of military-grade technology unlike anything we've ever seen before. Right, and so like the first battle tank hit the battlefield in, I don't know, whatever it was, like 1914. There's probably folks in this room that know better than me. How many tanks are driving around on the street right now? Very few, right? Contrast that with drones, right? Drones kind of had their heyday in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002. You can buy more or less a Predator drone on Alibaba for like 20 grand now. Right, and think about the grade of AI that you all have in your pocket right now with ChatGPT 4. Right, it's $20 a month. Right, so it does not take long to extrapolate that there's going to be a fundamental challenge here in terms of the diffusion of military-grade technology into private hands. And for what it's worth, how long do you think it's going to take before some idiot somewhere realizes that they can buy a drone, they can hook up an AI to that drone, and there's a mass trauma event, right? And we're all going to sound like we're surprised. Oh my, I didn't see this coming. It is coming for sure, right? The diffusion of military-grade technology is driven principally by its dual-use nature. Now, the third piece is democratic governance. The other challenge that I see is that no one knows what we're talking about, right? We're sitting here having these erudite conversations about disarmament, non-proliferation. Now we're talking to somebody who's an expert in emerging technology. This is complicated. Most people just want to go to work, get groceries, take their kids to school. Like this is not the stuff that people are thinking about every day, right? And that's okay. Right? But it does create a challenge for democratic governance if people don't know and they don't care. And I would argue that this is a fundamental import, but it's not something that's caught within the contemporary view of the world. So the question that I would have for this community of disarmament experts and non-proliferation experts is this a plumbing issue? Right? We don't care about plumbing. You know, the water comes out of the tap, right? You know it's safe. You know it's going to turn on. You know if you turn it hot, it's going to be hot. You know if you turn it cold, it's going to be cold. I don't spend my day thinking about plumbing. I just assume. So is this a plumbing issue? In which case, it should be probably best left to experts. Or is this an issue of high politics in which we should care and we should try and raise public awareness and have that conversation? And I don't know the answer to that, but I would raise that with this community. So now I'm going to flip over to my previously planned thing. Sorry, and I kind of did that because like I listened to the conversation yesterday, and again, you took the time to bring me here, so I wanted to be of service. So I hope that framing was useful based on what you're all talking about. So in terms of where I see this going, transforming geopolitics, right? So everything I just said, exclamation point, plus this. Plus we're looking at this in shifting geopolitical tides, right? The rise of China, the rise of India, you know, the most populous country in the world has the double distinction of being the world's largest democracy. And so we cannot discount that, but also note that the U.S. just unsealed an indictment because they have alleged that the Indian government was trying to assassinate American citizens. And by the way, in Canada, they actually killed a guy. So that's happening, right? Like that's you can't disabuse your mind of that kind of context. So I would go back here and say this is all happening, And the increase of miscalculation is really high. Like, we do not trust each other at all right now, right? Like, the UN couldn't pass a non-binding resolution that apple pie and ice cream go well together. Like, there's just so much distrust. So we're going to be in this place of destabilizing forces and potential miscalculation. So for me, this all goes to governance. I'm a governance guy, so don't be surprised if I want to talk about governance a lot. All right, so now there's also a suite of ethical dilemmas that I talked about. And part of it is that we're looking at that kind of classical prisoner's dilemma box where it's like, well, if we all agreed to responsible uses, if we all agreed to ethical uses, we'd all be better off. But I don't trust them and they don't trust me, and so maybe there's an argument to be had that we're going to defect and we're going to deploy systems where we're going to pull humans out of the loop because it's quicker, it's better, right? And so there's another tension that's underneath this surface, which is that there's going to be a push, I guess, to reconsider human involvement because of that classical dilemma where we think that the other side's going to do it and therefore we're going to do it first. And that's bad. Bad is a technical term. Now, also, too, the one thing I wanted to tell you a little bit about is that we're talking about AI in the context of lethal autonomous weapon systems, but that's not where this all is, right? There's many, many use cases. We're using AI in just about every possible system we can, all the way from like how many cans of soup for that ship to how many blankets for that camp of refugees. Like, there's good uses here. And there's also, yeah, sure, 5 minutes? Oh, yeah, no problem. There's also a lot of cyber uses as well, too. And so it's funny because we tend to be categorical about stuff. There's weapon systems, there's this, there's that. But it's interesting, like, this all runs together. There's a session going on space right now, right? Think about it this way. Like, right now, with the war in the Ukraine, it's a space-enabled war. It's an AI-enabled war. It's an informational war. So all of these things are overlapping. They are no longer categorically discrete. And I'll just say on cyber operations, this stuff is going to be rock and roll. The use of generative AI to pick apart code is something we've never seen before. The use of generative AI to conduct information operations is something we've never seen before, right? And so all of a sudden, within the span of about a year, we 10x our ability to conduct offensive cyber operations and informational operations at the same time. And now, with everything, there's always a flip side to the coin, which is that we're also going to try and poison the models, right? So the bad guys are going after the data set to make it do stupid stuff. And so, like, all of a sudden, we've got this tremendous potential technology, but as with everything, the bad guys are going to try and screw it up. So I just say that to say this, is that you can't think of AI in this like one bucket where it's like it's all about lethal autonomous weapon systems. There's so much more to the conversation than just that. It's an important use case, but it's bigger. All right, so now I also think that this means that our work is much more important. So I don't want to be a doomsday person here, but it means that we're going to have to get our act together, and we're going to have to do so very, very quickly. So there's lots of international governance processes taking place right now, and I don't think we need to go into all of them. But I would just say that it's going to be a challenge. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't really put everything we have into it. So the fundamental problem that I see is the black boxes, and also the fact that you're going to be asking governance experts, folks like me, to be able to talk about technology in a meaningful way. And so all of a sudden, you're going to have transdisciplinarity, right? So it's not enough just to be an expert in one area anymore, but you have to push yourself into an area of substantive discomfort. And I would also say this, too. It's a challenge for experts because we want to pretend like we know everything, and we don't. And so it's going to take tremendous humility. We actually have to approach this with more questions than answers, but we do have to get our governance processes correct. And as I said earlier, the timescale is not helpful here. So what do I think we should be doing? Strategic approaches. So we talk about accountability, transparency, traceability, governance, and incorporating feedback. For me, what it comes down to is building a trustworthy framework for AI and then governing those use cases. Right? So, like I said, this is everywhere now, right? And they say you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, right? Like this is already happening. And so the question is how do we choose to govern the edge cases? How do we choose to govern particular use cases? And I would say that we have to have a trustworthy framework. And whether or not this is the right framework, I don't yet know, but I would just say this, we need to be able to articulate what that is, what our vision of the future is, and how we wish to control those edge cases. And it's for groups like this to be able to think together kind of holistically about the use of AI in the broader disarmament and non-proliferation conversation. And I'm, again, as I said at the beginning, I'm really delighted to be here and happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Aaron. At least you ended on a positive note, which I really liked. So let's see whether Jasmine can pick up here and give us even a better idea how to tackle the idea of responsible or trustworthy AI. So can we have Jasmine on the screen, please?
Yeah.
Hi, Jasmine. We can see you and we can hear you. Good to have you here on the panel.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from frosty Geneva. I am so incredibly sorry for not being able to join you today in Brussels and, not give the impression that you are attending a manual that we all dread and curse. But I hope to still be able to contribute in a meaningful way to today's discussions. So first of all, thank you so much to the EU and PDC Organizing Committee for convening this conference. It's always a pleasure to be part of it. And thank you all for waking up so early to be part of the conversation today on what is not a light topic. So building a bit on Tim and Aaron's points, and in the light of the current landscape on military AI, I wanted to invite everyone here for a reflection on what responsible AI would mean in the context of developing, deploying, and eventually using AI in warfare. So beyond applications in the security and defense sector, and just as a background, the concept of responsible AI is in fact gaining traction as an approach to ensure that AI technologies are being developed responsibly, thus striking the balance between innovation, safety, and security without one being a trade-off to the other, but rather these elements being complementary and sort of mutually reinforcing. And the military space is not spared from this trend. Just earlier this year, one of the speakers mentioned the Netherlands and the Republic of Korea having organized a Responsible AI in the Military Domain Summit to be repeated again next year. But what does responsible AI concretely mean in our context? Is there even such a thing as responsible AI when it comes to security and defense? Some may argue that there is no such thing and that AI cannot inherently be developed responsibly for security and defense application. And I'm not here today to argue on this, but rather on the assumption that the train has departed the station and levels of investment and research and development in this space are going full steam ahead. I do have some thoughts on what responsible AI could or should mean in the context of military AI, as these technologies are going to be developed and are already deployed to a certain extent. At this stage, I think that what would be useful is delineating the red lines not to cross and identifying ways to which AI should be developed responsibly in compliance with the law. So we proceed with caution and ensure that these technologies are not going to be deployed in an ungoverned way and that this is not the Wild West. And this is me having been called a cautious pessimist by the UK House of Lords on the topic. So more specifically, I am suggesting two approaches. So the first is based on legal compliance with one specific approach, among others, of course, being compliance by design. And second is responsible AI that must be fostered through conducive regulatory ecosystem, both nationally and internationally. So first on legal compliance, we tend to think of ways to which the use of military AI will be in compliance or conversely in violation of applicable laws and most notably with international humanitarian law. And Aaron mentioned that AI systems will break the law, and we're not here for a debate, but I think that it's very much depending on how we apply the law and also what AI applications that we're talking about. In the end, AI is a function that will be integrated across the military, from logistics to intelligence collection to target identification and engagement. And while it is necessary and important thinking to think ahead of how the law will apply in regards to the application of these technologies after deployment, compliance with the law should not be an afterthought, but rather something embedded into the design, development, training, and testing processes of these technologies. So in other words, the responsible development of AI entails building compliance by design from the earliest stages of the technology's life cycle. And I'm not here to talk about coding the law, right? This is no such thing. The application of the law is highly contextual, and in the light of all the variables possible in an environment as dynamic and as messy as a battlefield, it is just impossible to anticipate everything and then subsequently coding it into the system's algorithm. But rather it is about the law shaping key practices at key intervention points in the development of these technologies. And this would imply clarifying the law, as I generally cast a tale of caution against saying that the law is not enough, as that would suggest a lacuna that in the end could be an invitation for those with ill intent to politicize and weaponize this lacuna, and quotation marks, for use cases that would normally be unlawful and or unethical and immoral. So for example, when we look at data collection practices, so in order to train, say, computer vision programs that will enable the identification of competence in a specific area, the training data sets must take into account demographic and cultural realities in the area of question. So harmful biases coming from insufficiently diverse training data sets could potentially lead to outcomes where civilians are, for example, misidentified as a combatant simply due to their skin color, their facial hair, or their attire. And beyond people, the same applies to buildings. So for objects, infrastructure, everything really. So in geographic areas, for example, on the screen.
You were breaking up a little, but I think we are good again.
Okay, no, so I was just saying that beyond people, the same applies to buildings, objects, infrastructure, and everything. So for example, in geographic areas where Bedouin tents are commonly found, the software must have been trained with enough data to make sure that the structures are not misidentified as, for example, makeshift military command center in tents, which otherwise would have been potentially lawful targets. Another example pertains to Article 36 legal reviews. So in a nutshell, in international law, it is customary for states to review new means and methods of warfare and assess their legality while they're being developed. So both in terms of first, whether they're inherently unlawful, and second, if not, under which circumstances would their use be lawful, and conversely, what would be the red lines not to cross, so to speak. So while each state has their own set of processes and ways of conducting such reviews, the responsible development and deployment of military AI should involve, I would say, an iterative legal review process because of the ever-learning nature of many, if not most, AI systems. So in other words, the continuously learning nature of the systems, taking in new data and changing their parameters of use may result in legal issues if the learning has affected the performance in a way that would impact on their compliance and our ability to comply with the law. So as you can see, it is so much more than coding the law into the system, but rather ensuring that practices surrounding the development of AI systems are shaped by legal compliance and ensuring that there are review processes in place to ensure a continuous compliance. And I could go on to provide more examples as I've spent over 4 years now on a PhD. I'm finishing specifically looking at this topic. But coming back to responsible AI through compliance by design, I think that there's a lot to explore in this space. And one key important thing to do here would be to make sure that these legal considerations are translated in a way that is understandable by the developers, those behind the technicalities of the system's development, training, testing, evaluation. Of course, it's basically like the rules of engagement for commanders. Like you would not expect end users of these technologies to all be computer scientists as well, just as you would not expect software engineers to have a solid understanding of the law. How would that translation look like in practice is something I'm keen on hearing more your thoughts on. So the second aspect of responsible AI I wanted to cover briefly is the need for an ecosystem of policies and regulatory frameworks in place that would promote and foster the responsible development of AI. As we start to see the mushrooming of national and regional policies and regulations around the AI development across the world, it is encouraging, but only a handful actually cover the security and defense aspect, and even less those who cover military applications. So you do have a very few countries that have developed entire strategy documents specifically covering AI in security and defense, the usual suspects like the US, UK, and France. But this remains the exception more than the norm, right? And in a way, this scarcity is somewhat understandable for many reasons. Like first, like not all countries may have the capacity to develop and then eventually implement such national strategy documents. Not all see this as a national priority just yet, and there is only so much capacity within government to conduct the groundwork, the research, the deliberations, and the negotiations behind the adoption and implementation of the strategy documents. There may be a desire to maintain a sense of secrecy and an ambiguity to maintain a strategic advantage. And there is simply no one-size-fits-all solution, right? Like the needs of every country is different. The strategic priorities are different. Some may be more inclined to develop and deploy their own solutions, while others may be more buyer, which again is fine, but then it means that their situations are so very different. But these strategies are eventually very important to develop, adopt, and implement. The UN Secretary General, in his new Agenda for Peace, has urged recently that all states should adopt such document in line with their legal obligations. And just like cybersecurity strategies, the adoption of such documents would be important, the main incentives being first, preparedness, as AI incidents will inevitably happen while they're increasingly being deployed, and we're increasingly growing dependent on those across all critical national infrastructure. So beyond security and defense, you have transport, you have the financial sector, you have the medical sector, emergency response sector, and this is all falling under the threshold of security, right? And second, these documents will build transparency for confidence building. And third, this will also in a way enable interoperability between systems as the ecosystems of AI solutions gain in magnitude. So in this sense at UNIDIR, I am kickstarting a new project specifically looking at developing guidelines for countries wishing to develop, adopt, and eventually implement such national strategy documents. And this is in fact recognizing the many obstacles and capacity issues many countries may face, but the stakes are simply too high, and these guidelines will hopefully be launched sometime next year in the autumn. And these guidelines will both be substantive and procedural. So first, substantive in the sense that these guidelines will include substantive considerations on what such national strategy documents should include, such as, for example, data collection practices, procurement practices, how to address the black box issues, the need for clarification on applying the law, etc. And then procedural. So these guidelines will also provide suggestions on processes surrounding the development, but also the implementation of the national strategy document. So this would include, for example, recommendations on multi-stakeholder engagement, including with the private sector and civil society, communities, the youth, marginalized communities, engagements across government agencies, consultations with regional counterparts, establish clear auditing and legal review processes throughout the life cycle of the technologies. And these are just a few, right? Like I'm just literally at the beginning. So I'll be conducting a number of consultations, both individual and in groups. And if this is something that you're interested in engaging, please do let me know. You can find my email online. So for now, I'll leave it from there. But I look forward to developing more on some of these points in the Q&A and beyond. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine, for this eloquent and more positive perspective on the issue. Before we start with the Q&A, and we have 30 minutes, I just want to pass on one question to each panelist, and starting off with Tim. You were talking about strategic stability and crisis stability always from the nuclear perspective. Do you see the same effects when it comes to conventional stability related to AI?
Well, undoubtedly, you see a trend in which conventional weapons can strike from a longer distance with a greater bang. And you could argue that that makes the absolute difference between the effect of nuclear weapons and conventional weapons, that changes it. I, however, would argue that as of yet, being able to blow up a city, the world, is different from being able to target a target specifically. But there's one thing here, though. If radical transparency leads to the introduction of first strike instabilities, which essentially means that you have the capability to take out your opponent's second strike capability, that would alter that equation.
Thank you. Aaron, when you made this reference to this race to the bottom, where two sides agree we will have some kind of responsible AI, however, I do not trust that the other is really using it, so I might not use it as well, so we go down and no one uses it in the end. You made quite a convincing case, I guess, but your last slide was a complete 180 turnaround. Like, okay, so let's go for trustful AI. And I always stumble myself. How do I get from this idea, there will be a race to the bottom, to, but there's a chance to regulate it? So maybe you can help me out here, how you solve this tension for yourself.
Should I just use this one? Yeah. It's a really good question. Or I guess we're in here, okay. It's a really good question, and I would say that there's maybe two ways to look at it. The first is when you're talking about policy influence, and I'll come back to that. And the second is when you're talking about interests. So when you're dealing with states, you always have to look at their interests. And the problem we've got here is there's a tension between short-term interests and long-term interests. So what I would argue is that it's in every state's long-term interest to have geopolitical stability. Right, we kind of just want predictability, and for at risk of stating the obvious, wars are bad, and so we'd like to try and avoid that. At least I would think that would be in most self-respecting states' interests. Okay, so but short term, it's interesting. Like there's again, as I said, there's a lack of trust, and it's all about outmaneuvering. It's all super tactical. And so what I just worry about is that the short-termism will actually undermine our ability to get to our long-term stability state, which is what everyone wants. And so in some ways, it's like we're playing two different games at the same time. There's a game of chess, which relies on strategy, but we're playing checkers right now, which is really just tit for tat, right? So I think that's one dynamic to be mindful of. But I am a perennial optimist, and so that's why I tried to leave on a bit of a positive note. And I would say what we're talking about is policy influence. We're trying to influence policy outcomes. And again, think about interests here. If you're talking to a policymaker, you can influence them in one of three ways. You can appeal to the heart, you can appeal to the mind, or you can appeal to the wallet. Okay, heart. It's an emotional argument. Like, think of the children, right? No, seriously, think of the children. Like, this is all terrible. Like, we have to get out in front of this, because there is I guess a really intuitive argument to be made about fairness, about leaving the world better than we found it. So appeal to the heart. Appeal to the mind is a logical argument, right? There's any number of logical cases that can be made here to try and swing us toward that state of long-term stability. And think of the wallet. There's an economic argument to be made here as well, too. So in some ways, my hope for optimism is that you can make a compelling case along the lines of ethics and what's morally right and justifiable. There's a hell of a good economic argument to be made here, and there's a persuasive logic that also we can lean on. Whether or not we get there, I don't know, but that would be the way that I would argue for the case.
Thank you very much. Let's follow on a little bit on the how we influence policy decisions, Jasmine. Early this year, the US came up with a declaration on responsible military use of AI, and 30 countries have followed that pledge and signed into it. So looking at it from the perspective of social movements, of the campaign to stop killer robots, was that the best thing which we could get, like a reflection over the use of AI, ending with some kind of responsible use? And was it triggered by this societal push, or shall we say this is suboptimal? There should be more in it if we push hard enough. So how do you judge the influence of civil society here on this declaration, and if it's the end or not?
Thank you. I think this is an excellent question. And so before working at UNIDER, I was at Chatham House, which was a civil society organization. And I'm a full advocate of the role of civil society organization in matters of security and defense. So, like I'm a bit biased in that. But I think that, in terms of the political declaration that came from the US and that was endorsed, as you said, by a number of countries, not just the usual suspects, but also countries such as Morocco, for example. Like, I was pleasantly surprised to see that. I think that it is good in the sense that it is encouraging, and I think that there is a general sense and motivation for regulating AI and promoting its responsible development, whether it is from government but also civil society and even the private sector. Like, I mean, I just heard yesterday that one of the major leading robotics companies are actually saying that we should be making unlawful the weaponization of civilian robots. So it's really interesting, and I think that it's something that is quite different from other technological ways, for example, such as social media, where there was so much more reluctance to regulate, and before then eventually getting the push for social media regulation. When it comes to AI, I think there is a general sort of willingness for regulation. What that would look like, obviously, it depends on each and every one. Obviously, you have the private sector and the big tech companies who want a certain set of regulations in line with responsible AI, but at the same time, obviously, the private sector are for profit in the end, and who they're accountable to is the shareholders. But then when it comes to civil society organizations and certain countries, especially those who might be more vulnerable from the risks of harm from the reckless deployment of these technologies, they might be more of a proponent for a ban. And if I've been following the discussions on autonomous weapon systems at the CCW since 2016, and I see a big improvement over the years. Perhaps too slow for some people, but I think that it is quite refreshing to see that over the past 2 years. I think that there has been quite a shift and a push in making progress. I wouldn't say that this the political declaration is optimal at the moment. I think that for what it is and for where we're at, it is good that we have that, but we need to go beyond. We need to have clarity on how to operationalize some of the recommendations, the standards, the principles, and whatever guidelines that we're developing. And beyond that, I think that in terms of the role of civil society, they should definitely be included in those processes. And ultimately, that would end up being up to the political will of states, but also the major players such as the big tech companies that we cannot simply ignore, in particular in security and defense, because most of the AI innovation is being done by them. They have the most resources. They play a key part in the social contract that surrounds AI as they're being developed in security and defense and beyond. But then, one thing I would also add is that we sort of, a lot of the discussions on AI governance, it's still quite done in silo compared to other technology fields and governance, such as, for example, cyber. And, of course, it's quite different and you need some level of granularity, but at the same time, I think that there is quite a lot of lessons to be learned. And one of the things that has worked really well in cyber is to have certain states that are championing pushes for regulations and to advance the responsible development and regulation of technologies. For example, in the ASEAN, Singapore played a key role for cyber, and in AI, I think that it is encouraging to see the US and certain countries such as the Republic of Korea, the Netherlands are really playing their role seriously as champions, trying to push for the responsible development and deployment of these technologies. And this is something that we should be encouraging. But then at the same time, again, we need to involve not just the usual suspects, but also that, so that we make sure that whatever outcome there is in terms of the ecosystem of governance for these technologies are inclusive and fair and equitable for all. Sorry, that sounded really UN, but I hope that this answers your question.
No problem. Thank you very much. Before I hand over to you, Tim, what did the mic get?
Thank you. I wanted to come in on a more optimistic note. Technical facilitation, could you get up the end of my slides, please? I wanted to share something with the audience. I wanted to make 2 points. One pertaining to norms. I mean, we do know, even if we would be hardcore realists, we know that international norms shape the behavior of actors. If you look at the use of chemical weapons, if you look at strategic air bombing, if you look at the nuclear weapon taboo, if you look at the successful campaign against landmines, if you look at the use of cyber weapons and whether they can target vital infrastructures, norms shape the behavior of actors. And for the researchers in the audience, take a look at Martha Finmore's work on how norms are promoted, propagated, and adopted. And in this context, my institute, HSS, is launching a commission on the responsible use of military AI as a follow-up to that RE-AIM conference that the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with the Korean government, hosted, in which precisely we'll try and bring together the experts, the technological experts, the ethical experts, the legal experts, the strategic experts, and then bring them together with influencers, like influential policymakers, to develop norms. Now, that's my first point. My second point is, does this work? Yes. My second point pertains to the notion, yes, thank you very much, the notion that if we think of regulating artificial intelligence, precisely because it's an all-purpose technology, we need to be very specific in what particular context, for what particular purpose we want to regulate it. And so I see greater progress going forward in zooming in, and that's why I would propose the PPTE framework, in which you look at the production, the proliferation, the deployment, and the employment chain. And here you can start developing very targeted policy measures, some of which, most of which definitely need to be voluntary because it's very hard to verify. But it's a start to start developing frameworks. And let me walk you through a few of them. And this is not readable, so let me just say it out loud. Going back to, thank you very much. So in terms of production, I think it does make sense to promote morally responsible engineering and create industry codes of conduct. And that relates also to the transparency bit and the safety bit and the reliability bit that Arthur alluded to. If we think of the proliferation of means, it makes perfect sense to think of COCOM 2.0, to an update of a Wassenaar arrangement, and to think of expert control lists that are constantly revised and updated. And here you should not only focus on the hardware, as the US is doing now, right? Telling some states, I'm not going to mention them, that they can't export advanced lithographic machines to produce semiconductors. But that may also relate to the proliferation, for instance, of expertise. Think of the Lugarnon in the 1990s and what they did with rocket scientists that were all of a sudden out of a job. Which proposed a real proliferation risk. So it also pertains to focusing on these sorts of things. In the deployment stage, you can think of developing very context-specific human control standards. So for instance, and maybe I'm going too far for some of us, but in some particular environments in which there is no humans, whether it's deep sea or whether it's air defense, you would say that a human on the loop or perhaps even out of the loop is okay. But in environments where humans are present, you're definitely going to say, no, we don't want to do this. In terms of deployment, you also want to separate your early warning systems, now I'm talking about the strategic stability part, your early warning systems from the command and control part. So you don't want to say, if you talk about nuclear weapons, our early warning system registered an incoming missile, now let's automatically launch. No, you want to make sure that they're separate, and you also want to communicate that, and be in constant talks with your adversary, who is also your partner, really, if it comes to strategic stability, to make sure that this is separated. And then finally, if you think of employment, so the actual use, again, and this is work in progress, but engineers are developing the use of goal functions. So you would sort of have an ethical governor hard-coded in the system that would override it if it would shoot at people. And there's the issue of transparency. So you can openly communicate your regulatory, your strategic, and your policy frameworks. So I think that there is a lot of potential going forward, but it necessitates that we go deeper down into the weeds. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we got a little bit more light here. So handing over to the floor. I would suggest we go from the right to the left. So starting here, 1, 2, 3. Please introduce yourself shortly and please refrain from too long comments.
Thanks. I'm Ashley Christ with the U.S. mission to the Conference on Disarmament. My question is for Aaron. He mentioned that there's a big delta between the understanding of politicians and the understanding from technical experts. What would you advise to a body of decision makers and policy makers? What would you advise for them to do to lessen that delta?
Thank you. We will collect the 4 questions.
Hi, Jules, I work for CIPRI, Governance of AI Program. I wanted to know a bit more about one of the questions that you mentioned in the opening, but that was not touched upon in the panel, about the positive impact or opportunities that AI could have in arms control and non-proliferation, if anyone can answer that, please.
Hi, my name is Maaike Verbrugge from the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and I have a question for Tim, Yasmin, or maybe also the audience. So I'm with our university's dual use committee, and so we very concretely also try to tackle these issues on AI. And what our people, our engineers and our computer scientists are screaming for are really concrete checklists, protocols. How do you deal with dual use issues? How do you structurally integrate these abuse and misuse questions into the curriculum? So I was wondering, particularly for small states, because sure, US develops a lot of material, but it's about how do we ensure that our technology does not go to China. But for a country like Belgium, the problem is more if we refuse to work with China, how do we get our money? How do I get expertise? So I was wondering, specifically for you, do you have any concrete protocols, checklists, anything that I can give to our scientists who could really use that? I would be very grateful.
Thank you for your interventions. My name is José Pires. I come from Portugal, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These 2 questions may sound like the gap mentioned between politicians and what's happening, but there are benefits with artificial intelligence, but there are also risks, significant risks. These risks may be perceptual brittleness, target misidentification, cascading accidents, such as where actions of one autonomous weapon system may rapidly trigger the action of another weapon. So incorporation of meaningful human control may be needed. So they say in the declaration, the political declaration of responsible military use of artificial intelligence and autonomy. So is it possible to have more human control within the framework of trustworthy mentioned by Aaron Schul? First question. Second question, does this have a direct impact in the Geneva Conventions, since these are international legal standards for humanitarian treatment in war? Thank you very much.
Thank you for all those excellent questions. I would think we start with Jasmine, but she's still writing. Is it okay, Jasmine, to start?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we don't have you on the screen. Can we have the external?
I want to be a ghost, like.
we only have you on the monitor. We see, but not yet. Now you're on the big screen. Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you for this really refined questions, and On the question on a positive impact and opportunity of AI on arms control and on proliferation, I can't speak per se on the opportunity on arms control and non-proliferation and the norms around it per se, but I think that there are opportunities with regards to the conduct of military operations and the more refined intelligence collection and targeting, enhanced decision-making processes, better logistics deployment and resources allocation. But then obviously this is with the caveat that the system is working as intended and that there are robust processes to test the reliability of these technologies, whether it's reliability in terms of mission success, whether it's reliability that is technical, whether it's reliability that it is able to comply with the law. In terms of the dual use and concrete checklist, like that is something I will leave to my colleagues because that was beyond my point of expertise. But then when it comes to the impact of AI on the Geneva Conventions, I mean it's in the end, the 1949 Geneva Conventions are part of international humanitarian law, like as a wider branch. And, I think that AI will have an impact in the sense that there are a number of elements that we need more clarifications on how the law is applied. And it might lead to, more, like there is a booming of scholarly work and research on how international law should be applied in the light of the development and deployment of AI, and I'm part of, of those like trying to clarify that law. But obviously, like how it is interpreted in the end can be subject to many interpretations. But then obviously, I don't think that it will, and I don't think it should interfere with the core of IHL. See myself freezing on screen, so I don't know if you can still hear me.
Now you're back. Yeah, it was just a 2-second break or so.
Yeah, no, because I could see myself freezing. But in the end, I don't think that AI should affect the core value and purpose of international law. That is the protection of civilians and ensuring that humanity remains in what is otherwise a really bleak and gloom situation that is warfare. Warfare is ugly. Warfare has a lot of repercussions on civilians. The impact is intergenerational. The impact is borderless. So I think that it's in the end, the international humanitarian law is there to preserve the little bit of humanity that remains in warfare, and we should ensure that this protection of civilians, this protection of the sick and the wounded, the protection of hospitals and areas of worship, etc., are maintained, and that this is not affected by the development and deployment of AI. What is really a question is how it is being applied. And lastly, in terms of meaningful human control and trustworthiness, I know that this is a question directed to another fellow panelists, but I really wanted to chip in. I think that it is important, and in the end, like we need to maintain legal responsibility in humans. I mean, it will always be maintained with legal with humans. But in the end, what we also need to think of when we're doing the risk assessments in terms of whether we should be deploying this technology or not in certain specific situations is the trade-offs, and whether the use of AI will actually be more of a liability or an asset. Because I'm a pessimist and I don't trust human nature as well. So there are situations where, I might be more inclined to trust more like the insights of AI, or at least help me make more informed decision making. But in the end, the decision to whether engage a target or not and the responsibility to it should remain with humans.
Thank you very much. I'm inclined to talk about can we trust AI, or is trust something which can only happen between humans? But I will refrain myself from this question and hand over to Aaron here. Please, go ahead.
Good questions. I'll maybe go in reverse order. On the application of IHL, I would just simply say, and I didn't want to be cavalier when I picked my edge case. I did that because I thought this was a generalist audience, but international lawyers can get into the details like you wouldn't believe, and I didn't want to put the room to sleep. But Yasmin's point is a good one. Facts matter and details matter, and it's all about application and in specific factual situations. And this is a deeply technical area of of law, and it's also a deeply technical area in terms of the application. And so, again, I didn't want to be cavalier, but I just wanted to make the point that there's going to be challenges in terms of the way that we think about the application of international law. On the question, I think what you were talking about is research security, and there are guidelines that I can provide in terms of what I've seen. Also thinking about sensitive technological areas and enumerating what those are, knowing that they're constantly going to be changing. So I've seen some of that work and I've done some of that. So I can give you my card and I can set you up with, and also some of my colleagues in government that do that as a day job. On the Delta question, that's a good one. And maybe we should chat after, because I'm going to say two words together in the same sentence, and I don't want you to fall out of your chair. Bureaucracy and innovation. It can be done. And I'll just say this, like it's a challenge. And when I got back from the REAIM Summit, I talked to my colleagues at CG and I said, look, we don't need some high-minded report from a think tank that's going to get read by like tens, if not 20s of people all around the world. If the problem is that people don't know what's going on, we need to tell the story. And I proposed doing a documentary, and my colleagues around the senior management table all agreed with me. And so I had a bit of a dog catch squirrel moment where I'm like, well, they don't teach you anything about documentary film studies in law school, but we're going to make a movie. And I thought I'd partner with the Dutch government, partner with the Canadian government. Maybe there's a conversation to be had with the Americans on something like this, but it's about telling this story, because the problem is a gap in knowledge, and probably the worst way to fix that gap is a report that no one's ever going to read.
So we made that documentary, but then specifically on robots and autonomous systems rather than AI more generally. So let's talk. So 3 remarks. One, yes, how can AI applications help us in counterproliferation and arms control efforts? Well, I'm reminded of the 1960s or 1950s and 1960s, and even into the 70s, when the Soviets and the Americans found out the tenets of strategic stability by finding out that deterrence requires both sides to have a credible second strike capability, which means that if you allow your opponent to have the technical national means of verification, that is the term, then the opponent can see what you're doing, and you can see what he's doing, and he can see what you're doing, which in effect increases the trust in the second strike capability. So in that context, you could argue that the combination of artificial intelligence applications with the emergence of sensors will increase transparency, and that can be used to track proliferation. 1. 2, it can help, and Niklas alluded to it, to track testing. 3, it can help track underwater movements, which is a very opaque environment as of yet. It becomes very technical soon, but there are assessments that will change in a few years. And 4, it can increase transparency in space, which is of prime importance to strategic stability. So here I see a number of very useful use cases, if you like. That's 1. 2, I'm going to take the 2 questions together. I'm going to leave aside the IHL. How can we bridge that gap? And how can we get sort of a better sense of the underlying technologies and expert list? So I studied many different studies, but one of them included science, technology, and security, and at King's College in London. And so there at the Department of War Studies there was a professor. His name was Zimmerman. I'm afraid he's no longer with us, but he used to be an advisor to the current U.S. President Biden. And he always said, why in the British system do people need to learn Shakespeare, but they don't learn the basics of nuclear weapons, for instance? And so to my mind, it really starts with sort of curricula at universities that even if you do political science of another study or international law, you also get a science, technology, and security course. That's very basic, of course, and applied, but that in turn will yield fruits in 10 years thereafter. Maybe that's too far out in the future, given the urgency. So 2 other things. 1, there are lists out there, yes, and we can provide you with them. And two, it also helps to sort of try and take it apart. So currently with a research team at HCSS, we're looking, for instance, at the technologies underlying swarming and underlying sensing. What we really are deconstructing it in its constituent elements, and then looking at what does it mean if you want to be, if you can produce it, and what does it mean to restrict the exports. And three, from a proliferation risk perspective, but coming from the Netherlands, I do want to. So Abdul Kir Khan, the father of the Pakistani nuclear bomb, worked in the Netherlands in the 1970s, and he stole brought with him, he stole the drawings of the enrichment facilities. And so it pains me as an academic and as a scientist, but in particular fields, we need to be very careful as to who we allow in particular departments in our universities. And amongst others, my institute have created checklists for universities that they can use to go to ask questions without doing ethnic profiling, but to ask questions for what particular departments, under what particular conditions enrolling PhD students is allowed or perhaps is not wise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Given the fact that we started late and that we had a guest appearance in between, we decided to give it another 10 minutes. So we would go from the middle to the left. And there was one in the middle, no? What? Okay, so we go to the left. Zitki, are you still on? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, okay, so be very brief with your question, please.
Okay, Niklas, thanks. And it's amazing that, was it 8 years ago we were in a panel and you were again the lead for AI. And we identified a lot of those things. I was a panelist there. And benefits versus risks. And the striking part is how much evidence and how much progress we have in the meantime and how little progress has been made in terms of controlling it. Now, it's not a question exactly, it's just a reminder to some particular aspects. Like when we are talking about like swarms of drones, for example, there's big confusion about whether AI is involved or not. Like the cargo example you gave about the Turkish drone in Libya. What is not clear in my mind, for example, whether it was like, go get the target that fits the following parameters is AI application, or identifying the target and go try to reach there the way you do it most efficiently is the other way. Whether the second one fits into AI, I'm not so sure. And second aspect, and this is the last, Niklas, I know you are very time conscious about that. The pattern detection and the separation between detection and command control, that's a very good one. And there I want to draw your attention to one danger, the overconfidence placed by human beings in technology and the results produced by such technology. I think this is the kind of thing we will have to tackle with. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Later on, all the panelists will have the chance to just comment on what they feel fit to keep it tight. So please.
Thank you. I'm Margareta Kinenellen from Board of Basel Peace Office, Switzerland. None of the panelists have touched on hallucination. What about when AI goes totally out of control, which is bound to happen, according to today's knowledge? Any safeguards in view or not? And my second question also to all panelists, it's following the question from Sipri. Is anybody from the private sector interested in producing AI to support, for instance, SDG 16 and the peace-bringing mechanisms rather than warfare? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Darina. I'm from Georgia, and I'm a part of the Young Women in Non-proliferation and Disarmament mentorship program. My question goes to Mr. Tim Spice. One thing we need is data to train AI, and in the EU they have already implemented regulations on general data protection. But on the other hand, you have China, where the surveillance system is quite sophisticated. And based on anthropological research, the people, the society, they don't see it as a like surveillance, they see it as a protection. So I want to ask you, what do you think, how can the US or the Western countries keep up with China when it comes to not arms race, but the AI race? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Oscar Prus. I'm from IFSH in Hamburg and from University in Halle in Germany. I'm doing research in parliamentary involvement of AI arms control, and I have a question to all of you. What do you think are the reasons for the gap, which I also see between political decision makers and influencers and the actual state of the art?
Hello, my name is Sasha Simon. I'm with the EU Institute for Security Studies. I'm curious about the distance between drones, which are now proliferating at a rapid rate, and autonomous weapon systems. We see them essentially normalized in the war in Ukraine. We see them show up in places like Sudan. And I would be curious to hear your opinion on how long is the distance to upgrade a 400-euro drone you can buy on Amazon to something which is semi or fully autonomous? Is it a matter of just installing the latest high-tech chip, or is it just a software update? Thank you.
I think next year we will start with the Q&A, so same panel Q&A.
Hello, my name is Lara, I'm from Brazil, and I'm a mentee of the Young Women in Non-proliferation and Disarmament mentorship program. My question goes to Mr. Schul. You've mentioned that lethal autonomous weapons have already been used, and this was very interesting for me because in the last UN talks on laws regulations, states like India stood against the resolution claiming that since these weapons are still being developed and they haven't been already used, we shouldn't regulate them yet. And I'm writing my master's dissertation on those weapons, and I was told by my professors and peers at the university that I'll be speaking about weapons that are in the future. So my question is, why do you think that both policymakers and some academics are not addressing the issue as something already present, and what can we do to change that? And as a lawyer, do you think that starting to address those weapons as already in the present could make a difference in the regulation process?
Yes. So last but not least, on the right here.
Thank you. My name is Sandro Knezovic. I'm head of research in Croatian Institute for Development and International Affairs. Thank for the panelists for a very inspiring presentation. A quick question. We have touched upon a morality dilemma with AI autonomous lethal system making an autonomous decision to kill a human adversary and executing that decision. On the other hand, there is an evident urge to shorten the kill chain and maximize systemic efficiency in the warfield. Now we know that there are different stages in decision-making process within an armed conflict. The question is there a point in this process where the balance between the AI and human decision-making could ensure both morality and functionality? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All excellent questions, and we go in the order we started. So, Tim, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for excellent questions. And next time, let's start with questions rather than presentations. I'm gonna address all 7 very quickly. So question 1 and 6 is on loitering munitions, right? And on drones and the difference between loitering munitions and lethal autonomous weapon systems. In effect, if you can pre-program a target with a system with a target signature. So let's say if you see a tank, attack the tank, and you then send it to the battlefield, and it attacks the tank, but you've programmed it, let's say, 24 hours ago. Is it already autonomous, or is it still semi-autonomous? We can have a debate on this. Yeah, maybe 3 minutes, not all.
No.
Questions. 2. Confabulation. That's the term I prefer. That applies, it's a very important question, but it applies to large language models specifically, and not necessarily to unsupervised algorithms that have created, that have seen patterns. But it does speak, well, we can take this offline, but we know that large language models hallucinate between 3 and 27% of the time, And if you want to use it to generate course of action, you have a problem because it can hallucinate, and we need to be very careful for that. Positive examples, yes, early warning analytics. I have a data lab where I have PhDs in mathematics and data science who develop it for early warning for conflict prevention purposes. And I think that's a great example of how AI can be put to good use. 4, data environments. That's a real problem if you look at it within a military context, but even to some extent in a social context, you can create synthetic data, which is a difficult term, but essentially you create an AI to create virtual data to then start modeling the interaction of the emergent behavior. And you also see that in gaming environments. We can talk about the real world, well, there's all buts to it, but this is a way to go about it. And then 6 and 7, 6 has been answered. The gap, how can we close the gap? Because it's, I would say it's difficult, it's complex, it's new, and this is why it's very hard to understand. But mind you, in the 1930s, when Leo Szilard, and we all seen Oppenheimer, many of us, when Leo Szilard crosses Russell Square, and bam, he sees the fusion, the fission of he sees nuclear fission, essentially, right, in 1932. And then he thinks you can create a nuclear bomb out of this. When he was speaking to policymakers, they didn't necessarily understand that either. It took a few years to catch up, right? So there's work to be done. And I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very impressive. So, Aaron, here you go.
I'm going to take the young woman's question here, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but let's chat afterward. And I've got a real soft spot for students, and so if I can be, no, seriously, I had when I was your age, I had a lot of people that were in my shoes give me good advice and help me along with my career, and so I feel very much obliged to pay it back or pay it forward or whatever the story is. And your question's a good one, so let me just grab the section of the UN report, and I'll read it to you verbatim. Logistics convoys and retreating half were subsequently hunted down and remotely engaged by the unmanned combat aerial vehicles or the lethal autonomous weapon systems such as the STM Carg-U-2 and other loitering munitions. The lethal autonomous weapon systems were programmed to attack targets without requiring data connectivity between the operator and the munition. In effect, a true, quote, fire, forget, and find capability. That is striking. And the fact that your professors don't know about that is striking too. But I would just say that I'm not here to blame. And also the fact that politicians aren't picking up on this. Politicians care about what people care about. And right now, like, look at the price of bread in the store, or the price of gasoline or home. Like, people are focused on the day-to-day. And so I go back to my central question, which is, like, is this a plumbing issue where we just expect the water to come out of the tap clean and safe? And if it is, fine. Then the experts, we got to get involved in a pretty material way, or is this an issue of high politics? And I don't have a good answer to that, but I simply say that not knowing is not good enough.
Thank you. So, Jasmine, your last words from Frosty Geneva.
It's always tricky to be last, but just to answer some of the questions, sorry that we've run a bit late. In terms of, the question on hallucination and if AI goes out of control, I mean, like, hallucination, I think, is just a fancy term to say, failures and mistakes, and, and malfunctioning. And, systems are bound to malfunction, whether it's AI, whether it's an AK-16, if systems are bound to malfunction. What is important is to have a fail switch that enables, stopping the systems, in case, there is a malfunction, that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that this malfunction, the risk of malfunction is reduced. And, if in case it does, when it will happen, then the risk of harm are reduced as well. In terms of, if you look at international law, and when you're conducting the legal reviews on the legality of the means and methods of warfare before its deployment, you have to look at the conditions and parameters around which the use of the system would be within the boundaries of the law. And if, a malfunction carries higher risks of violations of international law, you need to make sure that there is a function that features that ensures that, the systems can can, for example, be taken over, can be switched off and taken over by the human commander, for example. Or if, for example, even not just a malfunction, but circumstance and change, and the way that you would define an object or a building as targetable is highly context dependent. And if, for example, at the point of intelligence collection, the building was deemed as targetable, but then when it comes to actually engaging the target, it has become something that is civilian and protected, then you need to sort of be able to make a U-turn and make sure that you've done everything to sort of reduce the risk of harm on the civilian object. And in terms of the private sector supporting the SDG 16 rather than using AI for warfare, I think the key question is incentives. Like this private sector, they need incentives to sort of develop these technologies and this AI for good in a way. But what are the incentives? And I think that this is something that we need to think of. For the private sector, let's face it, that would be financial incentives. They need the cash to be injected in order to develop these solutions. And that is something that is a wider conversation we should be having, but we don't have the time to, unfortunately. And lastly, in terms of the gap between the political decision-making and the state of the art, I think that, as Aaron mentioned, there's also the question of, political elections, and priorities that might compete with one another. And civil servants, there's only so many hours that they can work in one day. It is encouraging that, for example, in the UK, even with the cost of living crisis and everything, there is still a really highly capable team that recently, just I think last Friday, released a high caliber report on the House of Lords Select Committee on AI and Weapons Systems. I encourage you to read it because it's really good. And it's but then in the end, it's because it's the UK, they have a lot of resources, they have the manpower to do that. So it also depends on so many factors that it's so much more than just whether they can do it or not. It's also a question of political will, the situations, etc. And lastly, in terms of the at what point would you say that there is a proliferation on AI, and whether you can have a makeshift autonomous drone that you buy from Amazon and you put a autonomous function to it. Obviously, it depends on how you define AI and what you say. Like it's proliferation is a big concern with regards to non-state armed groups with hostile adversaries and everything. But in the end, access to really highly sophisticated AI systems also requires supercomputers and powerful hardware and access to energy supplies that not a lot of people have. And when it comes to operationalizing the systems in the battlefield, obviously again it depends, but you can always try to sort of program a floppy AI within a really small really small chip that is like transportable and portable. But then is it going to be as fancy as the technologies that for example Palantir will sell to countries? No, I don't think so. So there's also the question of resources available to operate the systems.
Thank you, Jasmine. So I won't summarize this panel because I can't do it in a better way than all the panels have done. But we have seen God gave the physicists the easy problems. I think that's for sure. So let me join me in thanking all the panelists for these excellent contributions. And make good use of your 12 left minutes of break.